Hello and welcome. I'm Carolyn Grimminger with the Public Affairs Forum of the First Unitarian Universalist Church of Austin. Our program's mission is to nourish the mind and spirit and serve social justice. Our forums occur most Sundays at noon and are free and open to the public. We encourage you to attend. Our church is physically located at 4700 Grover Avenue in Austin, Texas. For more information, you can go to our church website at www.austinuu.org. Bob Hendricks is our speaker today, and I'm going to be introducing him in a moment, but I've been asked also to allow a person from the community, Barrett Sundberg from the Windsor Park Neighborhood Association, to come up and make a brief announcement.
Hello, everyone. Very good to see you. We appreciate our neighbors here in Brentwood. As a neighborhood association, well, we have formed a climate change committee, so we're very excited about the topic and the excellent speaker who's here today. We passed as far as we understand, the first neighborhood association resolution in the country. There's two key parts of it. One, that a series of actions that we're planning to take and campaigns to undertake to improve the climate efficiency at the neighborhood level. And then a series of legislative requests for all the legislators for all the districts that our neighborhood is a part of. And so if anyone would like to spread the word around to your neighborhood associations, have them possibly do something similar. If every neighborhood in Austin does it, it expands, and we can expand out through the whole country, improving at both the local level and getting a stronger response, we hope, from legislators. We have 3 meetings coming up that we've already arranged with legislators at the congressional and Senate level here in Texas, and we would be really excited if people from any of your neighborhood associations would join us. So I will have a sign-up list at the end if anybody would like to sign up to have information or participate, communicate with your neighborhood. We'd love to invite and work together with any of you. So thank you very much for working on this topic, and appreciate your good neighborship.
Okay, I see Alan has arrived, so radio is here now. Okay. At this time, I'd like to introduce Bob Hendricks. Bob is a full-time volunteer climate change activist. He is a Citizens Climate Lobby CCL group leader, CCL congressional liaison, and CCL co-leader for the National CCL Progressive Outreach Action Team. He is also a Sierra Club activist serving on the Austin Executive Committee and is co-chair of both the Austin area and Texas state climate change committees. Bob was a founding member of 350 Austin and on its steering committee from its formation in 2016 until 2018. Let's welcome Bob.
Can I use that microphone? Okay. Can you hear me fine? Is this working? Okay. Thank you for giving me this opportunity. This public forum is a wonderful thing. And I don't know how many of you know, but First UU has an amazing number of climate leaders, both in CCL, Sierra Club, 350, Climate Buddies, and others. And I really appreciate all of that. I am going to throw more information at you than you can receive, but I will be hitting the main points and the highlights. If you wish, you can get a copy of the slideshow and check on the others. Okay, the beginning of the book, The Uninhabitable Earth, says it is worse, much worse than you think. Why haven't we said how bad it really is likely to be? Well, there's a number of reasons, but one of the main reasons is speakers like me were told, don't do too catastrophic, or people can't handle it. They simply can't think about it. But it's now time. We are at a point in the climate crisis where we have got to pull our heads out of the sand and be open to the horrors that we are set up if we do not change the course we're going on in climate change. There are 5 key things that many people, I first heard this from Catherine Hayhoe, used, and I made a slight change in 2 of them that are bolded. Climate science unequivocally says it's happening, it's us, it's bad and getting worse, and we can and must do something about it. Now, most of these you already know, but I'm going to quickly go through a few things, especially since some of you are speakers. Forget the 97% scientists agree. I tracked down a climate denier, climatologist who worked on climate modeling, and he signed a document that said, we are God's chosen people and God would never allow us to be destroyed by climate change. The same document stated that evolution was false. This was a major climate model with NASA. Sometimes scientists have religious beliefs or they are paid huge amounts of money to go against the science. But the science is absolutely clear. One of the top physicists, ocean physicists in the world, who wrote the book A Farewell to Ice, puts it best. Adding carbon dioxide to the atmosphere causes a temperature rise. There is no way out of this conclusion. It's basic physics. To deny it is like denying gravity or asserting the earth is flat. And he shows some simple formulas that is basic physics that works on the earth, on Venus, on Mars, that this is absolutely true. Adding carbon dioxide to the atmosphere inevitably causes a temperature rise, and the more you add, the greater the temperature rise. Simple logic, simple science, elementary schools class can do an experiment to show that carbon dioxide captures heat. Now, it's hard for us to get our heads around how much we really add into the atmosphere. So here's a kind of a false question. If we took a 20 by 35 by 50 foot, the front part of this room, and made a big container, and then it would hold 2 tons of carbon dioxide. That's a lot. Now, if we stack them one on top of another, would it just about reach all the way to the moon? The answer is no. The CO2 we added just last month would go past the moon. The CO2 from just the past year and a half would reach all the way to the sun. The amount that we have added to the atmosphere is staggering. 50 billion tons of carbon dioxide equivalent a year, approximately. And it's visible. We see it in many, many places. As carbon dioxide rises, global temperature rises. The graph you see there shows it as a very clear trend. There is no doubt about that. So you know it's happening and it's us, and you also know it's bad. But sometimes we have to remind ourselves that we have really got to start putting at least a little bit of time into adding our voices. So we have here California wildfires in 2017, the worst ever connected to climate change. The worst ever until 2018, which was worse. 96 million acres have been killed of trees have been killed across North America since about 2000. You see here this massive stand of dead trees. Climate change, beetle infestation has dramatically affected our western forests. Droughts have left over 100 million short of food. The European heat wave of 2003 killed over 70,000 people, and it was the worst heat wave they had ever had until this week, which is worse. And Dr. Michael Mann said this is not a new normal because we're continuing to warm the earth, and it will continue to get worse. The monsoons in 2017 flooded a third of the entire country of Bangladesh, making millions homeless. Hurricane Harvey was a 25,000-year storm, and parts of it were over a 100,000-year storm. The devastation you see there of the flooding affects people. It hurts people. the coral reefs are in serious trouble. By 2030, warming and acidification will threaten 90% of all coral reefs, as you see the whitening of the coral there. And I'm sure many of you saw the notice that 1 million species face extinction because of climate change. 100 million to 1 billion climate refugees, according to the UN, are expected if we do not change our course on climate change. So we have got to do something about it. And as you can see, the worldwide extreme weather catastrophes are going up and up and up from this graph. And that is unlikely to change until we change what we're doing. So we know all of this, but we can and must do something about it. There are plenty of things that we can do, and we're going to go through some of those now. For years, we've said just stopping adding the greenhouse gases to the atmosphere would be enough. And for a while it was. And that's still very important. But we already have 415 parts per million of carbon dioxide. And and you saw how to get up. And over 12,000 years, as this graph shows, it stayed just between 250 and 300 during the entire development of civilization until the Industrial Revolution, where it shot up. There is 1 trillion tons more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere today compared to most of the last 12,000 years. So if we want to get back to a healthy climate, we have to do more than cut greenhouse gas emissions. We've also got to get some of that carbon dioxide out. 450 parts per million is just too high. It takes hundreds, if not thousands of years for the CO2 levels to naturally drop. And the last time the Earth saw 400 parts per million of carbon dioxide, the sea level ranged between 20 feet and 30 feet higher than today. That is devastating. We must get back to 350 or even better to that 280 to 300 range. Now, here are just 3 of the scenarios of sea level rise at 400 parts per million. Now, this takes time. It would be another 100 or 200 years before we saw this, but it would happen if we stay at 400, at just 400, and we're already at 415. You see the picture of Houston, where all of Galveston and 5% of Houston is flooded. You see New Orleans, completely flooded, 100%. You see the Virginia Beach, Norfolk area, Norfolk, Virginia Beach, Hampton, completely flooded. Newport News, much of it flooded. These show, and this is just the sea level rise effects. There's many other effects that we have to worry about. Now, James Hansen is probably the top climatologist of the past century, and he worked on models to actually get back to a more healthy climate. On the left, you see a graph of the carbon dioxide levels, if we do nothing, going up and up and up until they're above 800 by the end of the century. He also shows some very aggressive cuts per year of carbon dioxide where he can get down to about 400, but not much below, and maybe not any below. On the right side, that graph, though, shows what we can get to with carbon dioxide extraction of the levels that he identifies. And he has different scenarios there, but several of those scenarios go all the way back down to 350 parts per million. The scientists understand we need to actually do negative emissions. We need to take carbon dioxide out of the air in addition to cutting greenhouse gases in order to get where we need to go. So what can we do? What we must we do? 1, stop adding greenhouse gases to the atmosphere. The first step to filling in a hole is to stop digging it deeper. And number 2, we've got to capture some of the carbon dioxide emissions back into the ground. We need about 1 trillion tons less in the atmosphere. But there are cheaper and safer and more proven technologies than most of you have been told about. Now, as we look at cutting greenhouse gases first, We need to do it all, but there are some pieces that are bigger than others, and we need to make sure we get those big pieces done. You notice on the US and globally, electricity generation is one of the biggest pieces. Industry is a significant piece as well. Transportation is, of course, more important in the US with our car culture than it is globally, but it's huge in both. And the heating and of commercial and residential buildings is another big piece of it. So this is a picture of where we can cut greenhouse gases en masse. The second thing we're going to look at next is the Drawdown Project, which looks at the specific ways to cut it. They looked at 100 promising ways to cut greenhouse gas emissions to capture and sequester carbon dioxide from the air. So it's both cutting greenhouse gases and capturing carbon dioxide. A different researcher ran a model of how much each way could reduce greenhouse gases by 2050, and any technologies that were not already proven and accepted were excluded, such as direct air capture. So I have generated some tree maps that visually show the relative importance of different things. What this does is it shows different sectors from drawdown. And the first biggest sector is food. The two biggest items there, we're going to go through these in more detail. The second biggest sector is electricity generation, no surprise there. The third biggest one, tropical forests and other farming and practice that can be cut. And the fourth biggest there, the blue, is material goods, and that is a special case. The number one they put there is because there's a refrigerant being used that is 1,000 times stronger than carbon dioxide, but it isn't in large quantities, but there's already an international agreement that will cut that dramatically. So again, this is what we can cut. We can cut that by 100%. Other things we can only cut in part. Now, again, each of these different graphs shows the relative importance. The food sector, the biggest one, because of the methane released from the food waste methane, and then it calls for more of a plant diet that could create, that could reduce methane in cattle hugely. So those are the number three and number four of the entire process. But this is a big piece. Again, we need a lot of big pieces. No single piece will do enough. Electricity. Notice that onshore wind is number two, and it would go even higher, more important when you add offshore wind. And then the solar is we have number 8 and number 10 from solar farms and solar roof. Wind and solar are big deals, and that is very clear from this. Now, the transportation sector is a very small one globally, but part of a model is, what are your assumptions? They assume 16% electric vehicles by 2050. I think we can do a lot better. They actually ran another scenario which had 64% by 2050, in which case it became number 10 on the list. So this shows the models give us a relative sense, but they don't stick us. We can do a whole lot more on each one of those if we choose. And the buildings and cities is a small amount. The total amount is probably 55 gigatons, which is a lot, but it's only about 5%. But this includes things like LEDs, bike lanes, walking. We need it all. Everything helps. So how do we make these solutions happen? It takes action. It doesn't happen by itself. And I'm going to look briefly at the personal, local, and the national levels. Of course, transportation is big for this, and so we can make choices for fewer miles driven, more carpooling, better mileage vehicles. Food, we mentioned that. The decisions of individual about reducing beef and reducing food waste, that's more of a personal decision than a government law can do. Clean energy, obviously reducing dirty energy use is very helpful. It You can put in solar panels, you can increase your energy efficiency, and all of those things will help. I have added this. It isn't as specific, but I believe we have got to talk more about it. For a while, it was a taboo topic. And I know most of the people in here really do talk about that with their neighbors. And as you purchase more and build more, produce more, you reduce global greenhouse gases. So reduce, recycling, and reuse is a positive for climate change. There's also a lot we can do on the local level. We need to be pushing for clean electricity. That's a decision made at the local level. We need to push for clean transportation. That requires both the federal government and the local level working together. And the sustainability plan of Austin has a climate plan that has over 130 specific actions that the city or individuals can do. Again, everything helps. We need it all. But we've got to have national actions. We must act at the national level or we can't cut greenhouse gases enough. We can't solve the climate problem. And we will need multiple bills. There's not going to be one single bill. There are several bills out there right now. Methane Waste Prevention Act. We definitely need to reduce the amount of methane that leaks into the air. Coastal Communities Ocean Acidification Act. That act will study the dire consequences on coastal communities and on the ocean acidification of climate change. The Use It Act is a bill to provide money to develop direct air carbon capture technologies. And the Fracking Disclosure and Safety Act, although it may be more for clean water than others, we've got to start regulating fracking and cutting back fracking, cutting back how much we do and making what we do far less damaging. So, the last one, though, is the one I advocate most strongly as the Citizen Climate Lobby, the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act of 2019. It is the only sweeping national approach I see with a chance to pass soon. The only policy that inherently avoids any extra burden on low-income populations from the policy, and one that increases jobs, protects trade competitiveness, and builds economy. Now, the basic concept is you put a fee that steadily rises. That's crucial on fossil fuels at the source. It's easy to do. It is something that is already being collected. All the data is collected. The groups are there to act on it. Secondly, all of the money is returned to the households equally, so that this is for several reasons that we'll go into, but none of the money goes into basic programs of the federal government. And the third piece is a border adjustment so that we remain competitive on imports and exports. Now, here are my main reasons for supporting this bill. It works. It cuts greenhouse gases. It's a great first step. It doesn't do it all, but it's a great first step. It is good for low-income persons. It's bipartisan so that it can pass, and it works with other policies. There's no conflict with the Green New Deal. There's no conflict with any conservative climate change programs they might wish to come out with. So let's look at these briefly. It is not a prediction. It is mandated in the law that we will be cutting the amount of greenhouse gases steadily. And in fact, the largest public statement by economists in history has said that this is the best cost-effective way to cut greenhouse gases available, including 27 Nobel laureate economists, 15 former chairs of the Council of Economic Advisors, Republicans and Democrats, all of the four former chairs of the Federal Reserve. The reductions would include 50% in 14 years or less and 90% in 30 years or less. That isn't enough, and it's not fast enough. But combined with other things, it is a huge step forward. Then there is a strong upside to exceed the targets that are mandated that require regulations and increased fees to make sure we hit the targets that are there. Because right now there is not adequate incentive to innovate to cut carbon. This will provide that. Businesses can cut their costs and they can plan for it because it's a steadily increasing amount that they know 10 years down the line what it will be. Utilities, they plan ahead. So the steady increase is critical because it gives stability and it gives knowledge for planning. Again, it doesn't do it all, but it is a great first step. Most of the people who argue with me say, but it doesn't do this and it doesn't do that. It's not supposed to do everything. No one thing can. Furthermore, I believe that passing this bill could help depolarize this highly partisan issue, make it a Democratic, an American issue, a Democratic and Republican issue, instead of right now where it's been highly polarized. And it legitimizes the science. No longer are people saying, don't listen to scientists, don't listen to scientists, because they have a lot to tell us about what to do. It will also save a lot of lives. This number over 20 years, it's impossible to say. It could be a lot more than that. And if you look globally, it would definitely be in the millions just from this bill. Now, this is a very important point because we cannot hurt our low-income people. They're struggling to survive. A carbon tax would raise their energy prices and some of them would lose their homes. But this bill does help them. Even though everyone gets the same amount, how much it helps or hurts depends on your carbon footprint. That's what it totally depends on. If everyone has the same footprint and all fee costs are passed through into prices, everyone's dividend would exactly match their extra costs. But that's not the case. If you have a lower carbon footprint, you end up getting extra spending money because your costs go up much less than otherwise. And if you choose to contribute more to carbon pollution, you can choose to buy a electric vehicle, or you can choose to buy a gas guzzler. That's your choice, but you have to pay for it if the harm, at least some of it. So it is your choice. Now, it just so happens that low-income families have a much lower carbon footprint than average. This shows the basic carbon footprint graph, and as you can see, the lowest 20% of income have 1/4 as much as the top 22% and 1/3 as much as the upper 20%. What that means is that as the dividend comes out, for every $1,000 of dividend, they would have $430 extra spending money to spend on whatever they want. Low-income people would be helped, not hurt by this. And of course, we want the people who have higher footprints to pay more, and many of them aren't going to have a problem with that. The next piece is, it is bipartisan so it can pass. It is not my ideal bill. It was negotiated between a Republican and a Democrat, and it has a few things I don't like, but that's the only thing I think it can pass. Right now, we have to have 60 Senate votes to pass something, and if we don't have it we can't get 60 Democrats who would support climate change by 2020, and it would be really hard by 2022. So we need bipartisan to get action started. Now, Republicans, there has been a sea change in the last 6 months on their attitudes towards climate change. A year ago, nobody would say, there was hardly in the Republican Party, certainly not the leadership. Yet we have Senator Cornyn saying there's a growing consensus. The days of ignoring this issue are over. Senator McCollum says, I do believe in human-caused climate change. Senator Lindsey Graham says the greenhouse effects is real. CO2 emissions generated by man is creating our greenhouse gas effects that traps heat and the planet is warming. A price on carbon, that's the way to go in my view. So leaders in the Republican Party, furthermore, there are polls out that now show, look at that, Republicans under 40, 75% would support a carbon fee and dividend in this graph. And the entire Republican base, there's 53% that support it, but many people have no opinion. It's actually 2 to 1 of those who support it versus opposing it. So there has been a change, and there continues to be a change in the support. So I hope the Republicans will listen to their base and get on track. Okay, very quickly, some of the effects on those big pieces. Electricity, coal is the biggest problem. It will go down rapidly. Industry will hunt for ways to save money. Transportation, this will help people. It won't be enough, but it will help planners look in the future to develop better cheaper electric vehicles, electric infrastructure, and we should help that process along. And finally, in the commercial and residential, as we get cleaner and cleaner electricity that's cheaper, we can switch from natural gas for heating to clean electricity. All right, but what about international greenhouse gas emissions? Even though 30% of everything up there came from North America, and another 35% from Europe, the current amount that is done is we have a lot of countries that have to deal with this. This bill, the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act, actually would affect other countries for a very simple reason. If they don't pass something like this, then the U.S. will impose a tariff on all high carbon content goods entering the U.S. that's equal to the carbon fee that the U.S. and U.S. gets to keep the money. If they do, our trading partners would adopt carbon pricing equal to the U.S. fee, and then they get to keep the money. What country wouldn't want to be keeping money because it's scarce everywhere? So the same fee or tariff will be applied to the goods they export to the U.S., and their choice is to keep the money or let the U.S. collect it, keep it. They'll want to keep that money. So they will impose a very similar pricing on carbon to do that. Okay, the last issue is restoring the healthy climate. Removing 1 trillion tons of CO2 to return to 300 parts per million. That is the ideal. Now, there are a number of ways. Some of them are natural, and some of them are high-tech. So I'm going to look at some of the natural ones first. They include forestry and agricultural techniques. So the bottom right part of this graph, that whole large section, is mostly ways of changing agriculture to capture more carbon. And that is one of the least expensive ways, if we can get it done, to do this. And then the land use sector, you can see that number 5 of all 100 is the tropical forests. They could capture a lot of CO2, and right now they're releasing a lot of it as it's being burned for coconut palm oil. So, James Hansen believes we can remove up to 360 gigatons of carbon dioxide through changes in agriculture and forestry practices, and we should really be working on that. Drawdown models suggest just over 300 gigatons of CO2 can come from this. And no one knows how hard it will be to convince farmers and foresters to change their practices, but this, again, is an area where we need to work. It's, quite frankly, in the Green New Deal. It's in bills already. People recognize that here is one way we have to deal with it. Okay, then let's look at the technological. They list 3 things here. One of them is bioenergy with carbon capture and sequestration. That means using biofuels like wood to burn, but you capture all of the carbon dioxide that comes out. So the trees capture the carbon dioxide, the plant burns it, and then you capture all of the carbon dioxide and you end up with net less carbon dioxide. There are 5 such operating plants in the world right now. We need to see what innovation can do. They're not really the cheapest way to do that yet. I'm going to look at the bottom one, carbon dioxide mineralization. It is a natural way we pull carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere through certain rocks that just captures carbon dioxide. If we crushed it up and put it where there was water, it would increase the amount. But so far, it looks like it would take too much energy to do the crushing and the moving of the rock than it would give us in CO2. But it is an option that we can look at. Direct air capture and storage has no technological problems left, and it has no harmful effects for the environment. How it works, you basically have a solution that CO2 wants to join with. And usually there's air moving through the solution. It captures the CO2. You apply a small amount of heat, pull the CO2 out, and you capture the CO2. That's not the only way, but that's the basic concept. It's been doing in submarines since World War II. The very first such project was in Switzerland. It's a very small, but it puts it right down into the rocks, permanently sequestered, successfully. They haven't announced anything serious in the last 2 years, but they claim they have a really low-cost solution. However, carbon engineering, financed in part by Bill Gates, you can see here the massive amount of fans that are lined up there. Billionaires, mostly from Silicon Valley, have decided to back this Canadian company, and they're building the first negative emissions plant. It would do 1 million tons a year, and they've also already gotten some additional orders from some other companies to build these plants. We need to provide incentive to do this, but the technology is really far advanced. There's another one that is ready to go. It is a direct air capture machine that doesn't even use fans, and they have contracted for a solar farm of these, they're called artificial trees, that will actually capture also 1 million tons a year. And another one that is just finished their first plant for production is pulling carbon dioxide out of the air and using it to create aggregate, a limestone type of rock that can be used for road building, that can be used for concrete, for housing, build large buildings. And so this is actually, in places that don't have cheap aggregates, is already competitive in price, a way to make money while pulling carbon dioxide permanently out of the air. Finally, this is a San Antonio plant that makes concrete. It only captures 15% of its carbon dioxide, but that's better than nothing. And cement manufacturers are one of the big carbon polluters. There's no other way to make it. Okay, so there's a lot of technology that we can do. Now, it does cost some money. Now, this shows a variety of scenarios that's complex, but I'm going to look at the top line and the bottom line. Following the Paris 2 centigrade plans, we would hit 2 degrees centigrade by 2100 and 3.1 centigrade by 2200. That is not a very healthy scenario. But notice we have the possibility at that bottom one of if we get to net zero by 2050, and we did 50 gigatons annually of negative emissions of capture carbon, we would actually get back to almost to what it was before the industrial revolution started. That would be fantastic. Now,
which figure are you looking at for that?
the bottom line has 1,000 gigatons, and it has the temperature in 2100 would be less than 0.2 of a degree centigrade, and in 2200 would be less than 0.2 degrees centigrade. We would have restored a healthy climate that is similar to the long term. That is if we cut our greenhouse gases and do this, we can restore a healthy climate. Now, it does cost money. The money is not clearly known because we have yet to get the the economies of scale and all of the innovations involved. However, I would like to say that although it could cost $500 billion a year, the consequences of climate change just from sea level rise are going to be $10 to $30 trillion a year. That's a bargain if I ever heard one. So we must stop adding greenhouse gases to the atmosphere, and we must capture some of the CO2 emissions back into the ground. All solutions start with we. We are the last generation that can stop suicidal greenhouse gas emissions. We can take personal actions to reduce our carbon footprints. We can support local and national policies to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. We can vote and urge our friends to vote for advocates for a healthy climate. We can change this, but I can't do it. You can't do it by yourself. We have got to get together. And so I would recommend you look into one of the climate change activist organizations. As you know, I'm active in the Sierra Club and Citizens Climate Lobby, and we have things to plug people in from small to amount. Public Citizen is active. Sunrise Movement is at 350.org, which meets here, is active. Join a group and find out how you can add your voice. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Dale Beulah. Could you say a little bit about the Grand Canyon project and how people here could join right while they're sitting in their seats?
Sure. We need to put pressure on Congress. The Citizens Climate Lobby Austin group developed software that 5 minutes a month you can call your congressman and urge them to take action on that particular bill, or if you're not comfortable with that, you could actually urge them to do something bipartisan climate change. It allows you to do either one. It's an outstanding way to make your voice heard. If they start getting 20, 30, 40 calls a day on climate change, they're going to change their views about climate change.
Okay, thank you so much for being here, Bob, and thank you so much for this list of activities that people can connect to. I would like Barrett to stand up here, Barrett Sundberg, who spoke up early in the beginning. Barrett, stand up. A lot of people came in after you spoke. Barrett is here representing the Windsor Neighborhood Association. They've organized a whole agenda, a whole initiative around climate change. It's the first neighborhood organization I've heard do this. I think this is the advance of a march across the country of neighborhoods speaking up, and that will get a lot done. So please speak to Barrett after this event so you can get on his mailing list or learn how to get your neighborhood involved in this. Also, 350.Austin meets here the third Tuesday of the month at 6:30. We'd like you to come and join us here at 350.org and the Green Sanctuary Movement here at the First Unitarian Church, 4700 Grover, third Tuesday of the month at 6:30. Thank you very much.
And let me add, the Sierra Club Climate Change Committee meets the first Monday of each month, which will be tomorrow night, at the Sierra Club headquarters, which is up near Highland Mall.
Yeah, my name is Jim Merrick. You mentioned there are several things that this bill, the climate dividend, does not do. Can you tell us something about the things that it could not do or would not do?
Okay, we do not currently have a good way to measure methane emissions, and we can't put a fee on that yet. That would be better done by regulation, in my opinion, but methane is a big problem. Virtually all of the carbon dioxide emissions would be affected by this, but the transportation sector needs a little more help from, you got to have infrastructure for electric vehicles or people won't buy them. You've got to have a change of culture. And the city of Austin has recently passed a resolution to help develop the processes and the infrastructure necessary to move people, but we need actions like that in addition to this bill to do this. And so everything carbon dioxide, pretty much it takes care of, but the methane emissions, it really doesn't do much for. Nor can it be written to.
I'm Karen Franks. You mentioned what a huge effect food production and food choice has on climate change, methane and CO2 production. Could you expand on what each of us can do every single day, starting with our next meal, to make a difference?
As you saw from the excellent work from Drawdown, reducing our meat, especially our beef consumption, lowers our carbon footprint. That's generating huge amounts of methane. In addition, make sure you work with the City of Austin composting program, because food waste that isn't properly handled generates a lot of methane. I didn't realize how much until the Drawdown book came out myself. So those are the two biggest areas in which our personal choices about food can make a difference. And we can't legislate that nationally. That's going to have to be as people realize the importance and then slowly make that move.
Pat Beulah. We just recently took a 50th anniversary big trip and flew, and I'm worried about my carbon footprint that way. And so what we've done recently was to make a donation to the Rainforest Trust. How much help would that be?
The Rainforest was one of the big pieces, and the Rainforest Trust is one of the more reputable organizations. There are a number, there's even some Democratic presidential candidates who are offsetting all of their travel expenses by doing any of a number of good carbon offset programs online. They'd be easy to find.
Thank you very much, Bob. Jim Bryce. I have a question. It's a threshold question on the issue of what's really going on, and that is the difference between carbon having been sequestered over millions and millions of years and the carbon that's been on the surface and essentially recycled. It appears to my understanding that, for example, in agriculture, the problem is not the cows and the gases they produce. The problem is that agriculture is using fuels, fertilizers, etc., that are removing from sequester and increasing the amount of CO2. Had we not been removing the sequestered materials, our CO2 would have been constant because of recycling. A lot of people are confused by that issue. Perhaps you could help us out.
Okay, both issues are critical. You saw that big group of sequestering. We have let carbon dioxide that once was in our soil release back up because of bad farming practices. Good farming practices can then capture that back down, and that's very important. But the number of beef cattle in the world is staggering, and they do have the statistics on the amount of methane that's producing, and it is very excessive. That's why it showed up as one of the top 10 ways of cutting it. Oh, actually, the number 3. So both of those are important. Now, there are ways to grow beef that dramatically cut carbon dioxide emissions, the biggest one is called silvopasture, mixing trees and cattle together. So that's another way we ought to go. So again, we need it all. No single thing will fix it.
I'm Nancy Bellows, lifetime member of the Sierra Club. I just wanted to say that I could swear I read many years ago that deforestation is the most important factor. And you've touched on it, but it seems like a lot of talks about climate change don't really emphasize deforestation. And I also thought I'd mention that because here in Austin, of course, we've got a lot of pressure to have more housing, you know, and we need to be leaving trees up when we have developments. Maybe we need to pressure our city council people to, you know, encourage developments that leave trees up. But am I right about deforestation being so important?
There are different people have different opinions about the exact level. NASA has put it between 15 and 20%. The number, the rainforest the deforestation effects on greenhouse gases. Indonesia, because of their burning of the rainforest, is the number 3 contributor to greenhouse gases, even though they only are 1% of the carbon dioxide burning. So they're very important, but we have a bunch of other things that are also really important. No single item would really fix more than about 15% of the problem, so we need multiple solutions in order to fix it. So yes, that is one of the big problems, is especially rainforests, but also the temperate forests and the way they're becoming switching from a sink of carbon dioxide to an actually emitter of carbon dioxide, which is not a good situation.
So this isn't exactly a question, but there's a direct link between plastics also and the use of fossil fuels. Cheap natural gas from fracking is being used more and more in the production of plastics because we're producing so much natural gas, they're looking at places to use it, so they're falling on plastics because it's part of the production, what goes into a plastic. So besides polluting our oceans massively, plastics are also causing harm to our climate, and I wonder if you have any wisdom on how we can get away with that. I mean, methane is terrible for our environment.
Yes, I have not followed. I'm aware of the plastics problem. Sierra Club is taking strong actions right now on the facilities along the coast that are being built to do more and more plastics. I'm more focused on climate change. And yes, they're very much connected by the fossil fuel fracking natural gas, but I really don't have information on that.
Okay, if you'd introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Mike Gorse, and I wanted to ask, I read something recently about how some people in England had analyzed their climate plan, and specifically in regard to electric cars, and talking about how if they had 30 million electric cars, then they would drastically need to increase the amount of mining of copper and cobalt and lithium. And I'm wondering if you're aware of that and if you wanted to comment, because to me, I feel like I'm not saying that electric cars aren't a part of the issue, and there's no, like you said, there's no one part that's the whole issue, but I think that we also need to emphasize doing things that result in less driving in various ways and encouraging other modes. And I also would say that I feel like we need to let go of attachments and not assume that our lives are going to basically continue as they've been, and we need to be willing to accept that things like that might need to change, that we may need to find other modes and such.
Yes, that's a good point. The stuff that I have read has shown that there is currently easily available amounts of the key components of batteries available from various places in South America. But public transportation, bicycling, walking, all of that is much better. It's important. And I think they're more important than the electric vehicles, but the electric vehicles does seem to me to be the future where we can continue to run the economy where we do need to drive. For me, for example, I have a bum knee. I can't walk very far. I couldn't do most of what I do without a vehicle. I just couldn't use public transportation. I don't have the money to use Lyft, so it's going to be a mix. And public transportation is crucial. And yes, we need to look more closely at what materials have to go into batteries and what the effects of those materials would be on the world.
Hi, Bob. Again, Richard Halpin here at First Unitarian Church. You're speaking to the audience here live today, and you're going to be speaking to the television audience and the radio audience. Boil it down for us. I mean, you've given us a lot of data today, but put it in a nutshell. Why should we care about climate change, and why does it make a difference? I mean, get us to understand what the threat is to ourselves about this issue.
Climate change will have far-reaching effects It would take a long time to go through all of them. It would reduce the amount of food we can produce. It will create major water shortages. It will flood tens to hundreds of millions of people through sea level rise. It is destroying homes and habitat through forestry. It has instituted a mass extinction that we don't yet know how horrible it will be. It may create most of the ocean as a dead zone. There's a lot of problems if we don't stop climate change. And we know what to do. We know how to stop it. And it would be so much cheaper than just letting the consequences of climate change proceed.
Okay, we have time for one last question from Del Beulah.
Yes, once we've changed to LED bulbs, I read an article this last week saying that it's not just the rainforest. The arboreal forests of Canada right now are the #1 source of destruction of forests because of toilet paper, tissues, and paper towels. There was a list published showing how many old-growth arboreal forests are being cut each day just to provide toilet paper. And I think they mentioned Costco as being one of the worst, and there's a whole list of choices because Costco no longer offers recycled tissues and paper. So I think that's something everybody could do, just give up some coziness on your rear and help the planet. And that's something everybody should be able to do by just purchasing recycled napkins and that type of thing.
Thank you for that. And the temporal forests were one of the major pieces on the on drawdown. It was not as big. They see more potential from rainforests, but it is definitely an area that we need to improve. The destruction of the forest is horrendous.
Okay, so we're about out of time. Thank you very much for coming out and
for
speaking
having
with us
me.
today.